The abuse, it was horrendous. I was tortured. I never thought a human being would go through what I went through and live.
For this woman, we'll call her Sarah, the suffering began when she was kidnapped in her early teens. Forced to engage in stripping and prostitution, Sarah endured horrific physical and mental abuse.
Having gasoline poured on me while they held the match. Being kicked and stomped on, being drugged by my hair. Having 15 guys circle me and stomp me, and I mean literally stomp me.
As traffickers moved her from city to city, town to town, fear, not shackles, kept Sarah from breaking free.
Fear of my family being harmed, fear of myself being harmed or killed, believing that my traffickers would carry out what they said they would do. Fear of no one believing me. Going to the police was not an option at the time, so I thought I was brainwashed to believe that no one would help me. If anything, it would put me in more danger or even put me in jail.
Sarah's story is tragically typical for many victims of human trafficking, a modern-day form of slavery happening in the U.S., which forces tens of thousands of women, children, and men into brutal conditions for little or no pay. Many are forced into commercial sex. Others end up working in hotels and restaurants as domestic servants, on farms or in sweatshops. Esmeralda, a name we gave her, was just 11 years old when her mother in Guatemala sold her to a Guatemalan man who turned her into his sex slave. Smuggled into the United States, she endured long days of cooking, cleaning, and childcare, and nights of repeated rapes and brutality.
He told me that he paid money for me and that he can do whatever he wants with me. In that room where I used to sleep, he used to hit me, like, you know, I used to bleed and everything because we have a carpet in the room. It was blood everywhere.
While traffickers find some victims in the U.S., often their targets, like Esmeralda, come from other parts of the world: Latin America, Africa, the former Soviet Union, and Southeast Asia.
It's important to realize that although people might have been brought here willingly, when they do arrive to the United States, that they're put in positions that they had no idea they would be placed in. They're either forced into prostitution or some type of slave labor. And it's important that we look at them as victims and not as criminals.
Jail could be better because, you know, people they will feed you and they know that you're there. But that house, nobody know that I was there. I was like, that I won't do nothing. It's like, I'm not there.
Traffickers rely on brutal tactics, emotional and physical bondage, to enslave their victims.
He told me if somebody asks you if I'm your husband, just tell them I'm your brother or something. You better not say nothing. If you say something, I'm gonna kill you. That was he telling me. He used to get a knife and put it in my neck over here, so he was gonna kill me.
Traffickers use a variety of methods to keep their victims enslaved. We've seen everything from force, fraud, or coercion, ranging from physical beatings and torture to psychological intimidation or threats to their family members back in their home country.
Human trafficking occurs across the U.S., in big cities, small towns, and rural areas. It's unlikely that victims will be found and rescued in significant numbers until the American public gains a much greater awareness of the horror of human trafficking. That's the goal of Rescue and Restore, a major public awareness effort launched by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to identify and assist the victims of human trafficking.
There's really only one measure of success for this program, and that's increasing the number of victims that we find and that we provide services to.
The Rescue and Restore campaign reaches out to people on the front lines, those who have the best chance of coming into contact with victims, like faith-based communities, social service providers, health workers, and law enforcement officers.
Victims don't come forward because they're afraid. But another reason they don't come forward is because their victimizers tell them if they do, they're going to be arrested, jailed, and perhaps deported. And so the victims themselves are afraid to come forward, and part of what this campaign is designed to do is to reassure them that if they do, they will not be treated as lawbreakers, but rather as victims.
By watching out for signs of human trafficking, local organizations and service providers are helping to identify and rescue victims. Given Kachepa was just 11 years old when he was brought to the United States. He was an orphan, living in crushing poverty in Zambia, when a U.S.-based trafficker promised him an education, free clothes, and the chance to earn money to build schools back home. All by singing in this boys' choir in churches across the U.S. But once here, Given recognized none of it was true, yet he couldn't just walk away.
Just the mind games were the biggest things, and the threats, and that, you know, if you run away or if you call the police or the INS or the U.S. government, anybody you inform, they're not gonna have any interest in you. They're just gonna send you back. What good do you have to them?
Members of the Colleyville Baptist Church in Texas began to suspect that something wasn't right with the Zambian choir and came to the boys' rescue. You may come into contact with victims of human trafficking and not know it, so Rescue and Restore urges you to look beneath the surface and pay attention to clues.
There are a number of clues to identify a victim of human trafficking. Typically, we'll look for a lack of proper documentation, or maybe a well-rehearsed story that had been given to them by the trafficker. We'll also look for physical signs of abuse, and you might also find in a victim intense fear and depression.
Evidence of being controlled is another important clue. Knowing what questions to ask can help uncover victims of trafficking. Questions like, are you being paid? Have you been threatened? Where do you eat and sleep? And can you leave your job if you want to?
I was not free to move in and out of the factory ground as I wish. I was forced to live in a very unclean house and to eat ugly food.
Asking the right questions helped free Hao Trin from the unthinkable abuse she suffered as a garment worker.
They don't have food for us to eat. And in a small room with so many people inside, we have no electric fan and too hot in the daytime.
If you've met someone like Hao, Sarah, Esmeralda, or Given, who you think might be enslaved, take action. You may be the only outsider with a chance to speak to the victim. Contact the police if you suspect the victim is in imminent danger. Either way, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center to activate local, on-the-ground support for the victim. The Resource Center is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with operators who can immediately connect victims to community groups that can help. The HHS Rescue and Restore campaign has set up a safety net of organizations across the country to help identify, rescue, and provide social services to trafficking victims. It's a modern-day underground railroad to help victims on the road to freedom.
The goal of the Rescue and Restore program is to assist victims on their road to recovery. We have a national network of social service providers who stand ready to provide victims with services in their time of need. We're victim-centered, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that victims are being rescued and restored.